For a long time now, elevators have been, well, boring. You get on, you press a button, find awkward ways to avoid eye contact, and get out. Even finding stock video footage of them varies between dull and kinda creepy. Unless, of course, you're watching them on television.
Elevators on screen really waver between the comedy of awkward social interactions
I'm having a baby!
and the terror of claustrophobia or a sudden plunge. In reality, though, from a safety perspective, they're really the most boring form of transportation around. They're safer than cars, stairs, and lately even flying. But now, elevators are getting a lot of attention for the ways they encapsulate the fears and anxieties that arise in cities during the age of coronavirus.
And it's no surprise that the very first coronavirus-themed horror movie is set in an elevator.
Do you understand that there's a virus going around in this building?
But elevators actually have a long history of adapting to our fears and anxieties. And if we want to return to normal life in urban areas, elevators will once again need to design themselves towards being, well, boring. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
I'm rolling on my phone. I'm gonna clap. So it sounds like you dove pretty deep into elevator culture. Now that you know so much about it, do you miss them at all?
I mean, yes and no. I feel really lucky to live in a walk-up and not be one of the millions of people around the world who use them to get up and down their high-rise apartment buildings. But I also kind of associate elevators with like the sense of purpose of an office and going into the office, which I do miss.
What makes elevators such a concern in the time of coronavirus?
So many things jump out immediately. All but the fanciest and most high-tech require you to interact with potentially germy surfaces to operate. They pretty much all present the risk of other people crowding into claustrophobic space at any given moment. And I'm sorry to say that even empty elevators could potentially harbor infectious pathogens.
The science on just how dangerous elevators are is still being determined. It's unclear how many coronavirus cases can be linked to elevator rides specifically, and experts say there are riskier places like crowded subways and workplaces. Still, a lot of people are taking extra precautions.
Building managers are laying down intricate floor stickers to choreograph riders that they're facing in different directions. You have some buildings that are recommending or really urging everybody to wear a mask while they're inside, and others that are even encouraging people to keep their mouths shut while inside, helpfully enforcing that existing norm of awkward silence. And then, of course, you've got some people who are just plain opting for the stairs.
But any modern city needs elevators to function, and taking stairs isn't an option for everyone, especially not for people with disabilities or those who live in skyscrapers. While there may be different options to move horizontally through a city, there's really only one way to move through it vertically.
Elevators are responsible for the shape of modern cities. Over the past almost 200 years, you see a direct link between the evolution of elevator technology and the height of skyscrapers. Even now, the biggest structural height constraint in today's super tall skyscrapers is the weight of elevator cables.
Without an elevator, you could not have built higher buildings than, let's say, 6 stories, because no one would have climbed up 7 or 8 or 10 or 20 stories without an elevator.
This is Professor Andreas Bernard. He teaches cultural studies at the University of Bloomberg, and he literally wrote the book on elevators.
Safety and the history of elevator is intertwined totally, because if the elevator should be an absolute standard part of the new high-rise buildings, it had to be 100% safe.
While various forms of hoisting things upwards had been used for thousands of years, it was the late 1800s that the modern elevator takes shape.
If you now Google the history of the elevator, you will always find one crucial event where everybody says this was the most important event in the early history of elevator. And this is the invention of Elisha Otis, who invented some brakes in 1855, which prevent the cabin from falling down when the rope was torn apart. When they gained the monopoly in producing elevators around 1900, reinvented the history in their sense.
A few years after the invention of this brake technology, elevators were kicking off high-rise buildings all over the world. And as cities became taller and denser, elevators soon ran into more perceived safety concerns as well.
It's pretty interesting. If you study the early history of claustrophobia around 1880, then you realize that all the early cases of claustrophobia which shaped this disease took place in elevators. So the elevator was kind of the paradigmatic urban place for this new disease.
Soon, some elevators would adapt to this new anxiety.
I was very surprised that the glass elevator was a big fashion around 1910, 1920. And this was a reason for that, to make things transparent, less claustrophobic. So the glass elevator would be a design decision to make the elevator more friendly.
Even now, elevators often have mirrors or reflective surfaces inside. That gives you an illusion of space.
Going down.
In the elevator, there are a lot of visual and acoustic phenomena which should help people that this time of the ride gets over very fast.
And that brings us to elevator music, or Muzak. The Muzak company sold this background music, which promised to help increase worker efficiency in factories, or have shoppers linger a little longer in department stores. But it became most iconic as a method to soothe elevator riders, and it's often played for a laugh in films.
Elevator music didn't have the impact or the necessity to be artistically sophisticated or to be complex. It just had the mere impact to get this 30 seconds of the elevator ride being over as quickly as possible.
But as this Muzak attempted to make it feel like the elevator ride was shorter, modern-day elevators had turned to algorithms to actually reduce travel time and boost efficiency.
I think elevators continue to evolve and change.
This is John Clarine from ThyssenKrupp, the largest producer of elevators in the Americas.
So if you think about a typical elevator experience, it's pretty simple. You have an up and down button outside the elevator. You choose that. You and any other user that may need to ride the elevator at that time gets on. You select your floor, and it naturally just rises up or down to arrive at those floors in series and in order and drop off and add riders. And for the most part, on simple buildings with normal traffic flow, those systems can work just fine, and they do all over the world.
But operating the same type of system in large buildings with many people who want to get places quickly can be fraught. That's why a growing number of modern buildings utilize behind-the-scenes software that helps direct the largest number of people to the most efficient route possible.
So you might have experienced this if you've walked into a new skyscraper recently, or at least in the before times. You select your floor outside the elevator, or you tell the security guard where you're going, and an elevator is dispatched directly to you and other people who are heading to the same place.
The efficiency grows tremendously. It's about a 30 to 40% improvement in overall elevator system efficiency.
But currently, packing the most amount of people into elevators doesn't really make sense. As the world begins to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic and office buildings begin to reopen, elevators again need to adapt to deliver those passengers as safely as possible.
So the experts mostly urge the same precautions you're hearing for other kinds of spaces. Try to avoid pushing the buttons with your hands, don't touch your face, wash your hands afterwards, and do try to wear a mask, both for your own protection and for other people. And try to ride the elevator alone. If you absolutely can't, make sure other people inside the car are wearing a mask, especially if you're going to be in there for a while.
And while limiting the number of passengers drastically hurts the efficiency of elevators in large buildings, John explains that the same software-based elevator system can actually help encourage social distancing.
We reprogram those algorithms. We adjust those algorithms so it doesn't direct to load to the max efficiency and capacity, but instead it loads it to obviously fewer users.
So let's say 8 people all want to go to the 11th floor. Instead of an elevator being dispatched to move the most amount of people the fastest, 2 elevators can be sent and encourage socially distanced travel. But as you might imagine, this slowdown in efficiency could easily create concerns over crowded lobbies.
And that's where we need to look at traffic data. And that's where the elevators can also tell us where it had been in the past in terms of usage and volume. And we can help our customers make those adjustments to the algorithm so they can focus on safety first and social distancing first, but balance that and stay ahead of the potential traffic congestion that might be coming.
Elevator companies are eager to sell these upgraded services to property managers, as well as new hardware solutions like kick buttons and UV light to help disinfect not only the cabin, but to help in air purification. The only issue? They're expensive.
It might might surprise you to hear that elevator companies are not hurting quite as much as you might expect. It seems stock market investors have been putting their stock in a lot of the new technology, services, and improvements that these companies are increasingly selling. Plus, people in residential buildings are always going to need to be able to ride.
And while many have gotten inventive with their solutions for elevator travel, the maintenance of these elevators have left many with severe outages.
While large employers and luxury skyscrapers might have no problem upgrading to the elevators of the future, there are also plenty of tall buildings where elevators are essential, but where they might not even be functioning. Take, for example, some of the towers in New York City's public housing stock. Broken lifts in some buildings have forced people into stairwells or even left them trapped, while extended outages have rendered social distancing a laughable fantasy. And when only one elevator is functioning, inevitably tired residents crowd aboard. Meanwhile, people with disabilities are left with little recourse.
While elevators were relatively mundane only a few months ago, it was really over a century of innovations that made it possible to think of elevators as boring in the first place. And as these city-making machines must again change for the sake of safety, they also offer a lens into the socioeconomic differences of urban life, and the way they relate to the big socioeconomic disparities in the coronavirus risks.
Imagine a luxury skyscraper that's housing hundreds of residents in a small space. Thanks to high-tech, contact-free, direct dispatch elevator technology, those residents might be able to get to their cloud-like abodes without ever coming into contact with anyone else. But that's not true, necessarily, for low-income residents, who, in addition to dealing with broken elevators, are also more likely to be going into work, riding crowded trains, and sharing poorly ventilated homes with other people. As we know from case data, it's lower income people of color and people with pre-existing health conditions who are at highest risk for coronavirus in many of our cities. So if we're thinking about elevators as a problem to solve in this new age of health risk and health anxiety, it may be worth focusing first on the riders who are most affected.